This is a video on how to write connections responses for NCEA English. This is a video that's intended for NCEA Level 1 English students at Greymouth High School. When you're structuring your writing for your connections essay, if you have chosen to do a written response for your submission, you need to be aware that you have to write about 4 different texts and the ways that they're connected. There are 2 possible ways that you can structure your connections writing. One of them is to have 2 main body paragraphs that compare the connections between 2 texts in each paragraph, and another is to have 4 paragraphs that have 1 text per paragraph. Bear in mind that these are body paragraphs and that for a connections essay to be strong, it needs to have an introduction and a conclusion as part of the writing. So for the first option, you'd have a total of 4 paragraphs, which include 1 introduction, 2 body paragraphs with 2 texts in each paragraph, and a conclusion. For the second option, you'd have 6 paragraphs, so 1 paragraph would be your introduction, and then you'd have 1 paragraph for each of your 4 texts, and then the 6th paragraph would be your conclusion. So your essay structure options would look like this. You would have your 4 paragraphs in total if you chose to write about 2 texts in each paragraph, or you'd have 6 in total with 1 text for each paragraph and the connection between those texts discussed in each of your 4 paragraphs. For your introduction, when you're writing about the connections between texts, you need to be mindful that in your introduction you need to explicitly identify the main connection that you have identified between the texts. So you might have already noticed that there's a connection within one kind of thematic umbrella, but you have to explicitly identify it in your introduction so that your reader and your marker knows that this is the connection that you've identified. The next part is that you need to explain the ideas within that connection. So what we mean by this is the main connection you've identified might be a single theme, or it might be a technical connection of some kind, but you would have also had ideas that fall under a greater umbrella. So for example, if your main connection might be the theme of unconditional love, one idea that might show this theme would be sacrificing something for a person you love. So that is one idea, one example of unconditional love being shown as a thematic element that could occur in multiple texts. The third thing that's really important to include in your introduction is that you need to identify the texts you're using. So much like other English-based essays, in your introduction you need to tell the reader what you are talking about, what text you are talking about. This would be a good place to include the name of the text and possibly the writer or director when you identify the text that you're using. The fourth part of your introduction is an optional part, but it allows you to include the ideas that you're going to link to each text within maybe the main connection that you found. So if you look back at point number 2, where you've got the main theme of unconditional love, and one of the ideas that shows the theme is sacrificing something for a person you love, in option number 4, you might use the idea sacrificing something for a person you love, and then another idea that also shows unconditional love, and you could identify those in your introduction as well. That's not an absolute necessity when you're writing an introduction for connections, but it is helpful to anchor your ideas and also to keep your essay quite structured and allow your reader to know what they need to expect when they're reading through. When you do your body paragraphs, you need to make sure there's a statement about your understanding of the connection. So in your statement, you would identify any ideas that you're going to discuss that you've seen within your texts. So your body paragraph, if you have chosen to write on 1 text per paragraph, is not limited to a single idea or a single example, and you're allowed to, in your paragraphs, discuss multiple ideas that show the same main theme or main connection, and you can identify those within your statement. So for example, if you've chosen a text that you're going to link to the main connection of unconditional love, but the examples you have from the text have multiple ideas that show unconditional love, you can identify those ideas in the statement in your body paragraph. The next step would then be to explain those ideas that you've identified. So basically what you think it means, or to expand on it a little bit. So if you've identified unconditional love as the main connection, but then you've also identified multiple ideas that show that, the next step in your body paragraph is to explain a little bit further about those ideas that you've identified if you have gone beyond just a single main connection umbrella. So for example, if we look back at our introduction, where the idea that's identified there is sacrificing something for a person you love, you might explain in your second part of the body paragraph, it's this section right here, you might explain what sacrificing something actually means or what it might look like in the text. Your next part is where you give your specific examples from the text. So this is where you can use those skills that you've developed of being able to identify film techniques or language features, and you can quote sections of your text here, or you can give a kind of general overview of an example or a scene in the film or in your narrative text or in your poem. That's the part where you put your specific example. Remember, the important thing about the connections assessment is you're actually being assessed on your ability to find connections between the texts rather than your ability to discuss the effect of certain technical aspects. It's good to have those examples in here because it does help to kind of make your explanations a little bit stronger. But that is not necessarily what you're being assessed on. You're being assessed on your ability to find a connection between texts. Your next part there is kind of what you would usually do in any other essay when you're writing about a single text, is you'd explain the relevance of your example to your connection. So that is the relevance of your example to the idea or the theme that you're talking about, which is the connection that you have identified in both your statement up here and also in your introduction. And then the last bit helps to kind of round out your thinking in your body paragraph. That's where you need to include why you think this connection is significant for the audience or for the wider world. You can include why it's significant to both, but to help kind of give your paragraph a little bit of analysis, you just need to add one or the other. This is what a format for a body paragraph might look like. So you'd have your statement, and within the first line, you will have identified your text and the main connection theme. So in the film, blah, 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 the audience sees this idea. Then you'd go on to explain it, or explain the idea. So this idea is often used to, or is often shown or seen through blah, blah, blah. So if we're using unconditional love, that orange section would turn into unconditional love might be seen through sacrificing something for the people we care about. And that would be the green section. Then you'd go on to give an example of that. So we see a character sacrifice something for the person or people they care about when so-and-so does this in the story. Then you'd go on to link the ideas that you identified within your connection. So you would say, this helps us to see that so-and-so sacrificing something for the person that they care about was a form of unconditional love because blah, blah, blah. Then you'd finish it off with a link to the wider world This helps the audience to understand the idea of unconditional love because, or this helps the audience to see that unconditional love is not always beneficial, or that unconditional love is a wonderful thing, blah, blah, blah. So this format at the top is actually what you would use if you were writing about a single text. If you're writing about two texts in one paragraph, you'd repeat 1, 2, and 3. So that explanation, example, and link to your connection for your second text all within the one space. Once you've done that, you're obviously going to go and conclude, and your conclusion should revisit the main connection that you identified. So in your conclusion, you're reiterating the connection that you identified at the beginning of your essay, and then you're also revisiting the text that you spoke about in your paragraphs. So you're reminding your reader what the original connection was that you identified between them, and summarizing how those connections were shown to the audience or to the reader or to the viewer of the text. So here we've got an example introduction. So we're sticking with that theme of unconditional love. So in this introduction, we have our statement, which identifies the main connection between the texts. Unconditional love is a theme that helps audiences to see the way people develop relationships. It's kind of a catchy-ish statement, but it's also a general statement, and that general statement allows you to elaborate a little bit and explain your own ideas or the specific ideas you'd like to talk about. It also doesn't kind of jump straight into telling the audience what the texts are. It's a little bit of an opportunity for you to tell the audience about a theme without necessarily having the essay feel or your writing feel like it's just a checkbox that you are using. So the next part there goes and elaborates on ideas within the main connection. Sometimes unconditional love is shown through somebody making a sacrifice for the person they love, or making a choice that benefits somebody that a character cares about. So there, in this second sentence here, we've got an opportunity for your reader to see some of the ideas that you identified as showing your main theme. And it also sets up the essay for you to be able to talk about those ideas at a later stage in your writing. Then the next part of the introduction identifies the texts. So the specific text that you've chosen, that you've seen this theme or your main connection through. The theme of unconditional love is seen in the texts Great Gatsby, Titanic, Loving, and Romeo and Juliet. And then the last bit, you're identifying specific ideas that link to the main connection or theme. All of these texts show the sacrifices that a character makes for the people that they care most about. So right there in that introduction, you've identified the main connection, you've elaborated on a little bit, so you're opening up the space for yourself to be able to talk about some of those wider ideas later on. You've identified the text for your reader, and you've then gone and shown some of the links that are made between those ideas and the main connection. Now here's an example body paragraph. We've gone here with the text The Great Gatsby. So if we look at the colours, that blue there, that's where you would insert text. So if we go back, we've got text, an idea, idea within connection, example from text, links to ideas, and links to the wider world. So we've used the same colour scheme to show that in our body paragraph examples. So in the story The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, the audience sees the idea of unconditional love. So in that statement, we have an introduction of the text and an introduction of the theme. Next, we go on to explain our theme a little bit more by identifying some ideas that we might have seen in the film that shows this theme. So unconditional love is seen through the ways that the characters make choices that benefit the people that they care about. So here we've got an idea that falls within your wider theme. So your theme is not a standalone idea. It might be an idea that's shown, but it's also something that should have other types of ideas come through under it. Okay, so then we go from explaining your theme to using a specific example from the text. We see Jay make choices that benefit Daisy when he ensures that she has privacy that keep her husband from discovering their affair, despite the negative impact it has on his own happiness to see her go back to him constantly. So we've got our specific example in red from the text. This example is a general kind of summary of an event or situation or series of events within the text. This is enough to allow you guys to discuss the theme, but there are opportunities in this particular example for you to include a specific quote from the text as well. I haven't included one here, but it is helpful to consider including a quote or some reference to a film or language technique when you are using specific examples from the text. So from here, we go on to explain the link to the main connection. So this example shows unconditional love does not always mean that we can have our own happiness when we are making choices to benefit somebody we care about. So we've got a link to this idea of making choices to benefit other people and a link to the main connection of unconditional love. In that yellow statement there, we can kind of see a value statement has been made by the person who's written this paragraph, and it offers you a kind of commentary on whether or not you think that this theme is showing the audience a specific angle, or the idea is showing the audience a specific angle on the theme. And doing that, kind of taking a specific angle on your theme, is kind of what allows you to then move on to your wider world link. So that yellow section has prepped us quite nicely for our link to the wider world, or why it's important for the audience. So this helps us to understand that unconditional love is not always good for both people involved and can sometimes leave us hurt to benefit somebody else. So here you've made like a nice link to the wider world or a wider understanding of the idea. It doesn't have to be really complicated. It can just be one sentence, just like this, that you use to show how somebody in general might interpret the theme or idea, or how the theme or idea can be generalized beyond the text. We've also included an example paragraph for two texts, this time including Titanic, and we've shown you here that there is an opportunity to kind of go back and forth between certain aspects of the text, of the paragraph structure. So in the first sentence, you, instead of just identifying the one text, you might identify both. So the main characters in The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald and Titanic, directed by James Cameron, stumbled across people within whom they share unconditional love. That's wrong there. That's not the right word choice. Apologies, team. So in that statement, we've got an identification of both texts and then the theme that connects them. So we've explicitly connected these two texts with our theme all in a single statement. Then we've gone and generalized about both of the texts in our next section. The characters develop an unconditional love when they put the needs of their partner above their own. So here you've expanded on the idea that helps you to see unconditional love in both texts. And then you go on to give an example. In The Great Gatsby, Jay puts the needs of Daisy above his own when he stays in the garden to make sure that she is all right after the accident. This shows that Jay's love for Daisy means that he would rather make sure that she is stable than leave her alone with her angry husband. Right? So we've got a specific example and we've got a link to how that example demonstrates unconditional love, or demonstrates the idea that's linked to the theme. Then we've got our next specific example, which is again a number 2. In Titanic, we see Jack also put the needs of Rose above his own when he convinces her to stay on top of the floating debris after the ship sinks. So here, we've got a linkage in that statement. Jack also puts the needs of Rose above his own. This there is what we would use when we are talking about two texts in one paragraph. That's your comparative statement. That's your immediate link. Okay, and it means that the two examples are actually connected in the writing, not just you making two connections that are seemingly related and just squashing them into one paragraph, right? So just again, in Titanic, we see Jack also puts the needs of Rose above his own when he convinces her to stay on top of the floating debris. Same idea, and you're talking about a different example that shows exactly the same idea. Then you go on to explain the link between your example and the theme. This shows Jack's unconditional love for Rose when he would rather give her a chance to survive than freeze in the water. Right? So you've got two examples, two specific examples, two links to the theme, and that both of them are using the exact same idea of putting the needs of their partner above themselves. Then you've obviously got your link that closes off your paragraph, and this link you can use as a generalization between your two texts. This helps us to understand that conditional love is not always good for people involved. Both people involved can sometimes leave us hurt to benefit somebody else. So hopefully that's going to give you guys a little bit of an idea as to how you can structure the paragraphs that you're writing, and also the types of information that you need to include when you are completing your connections essays. Good luck, team.